So the first thing is, the question is, when we discuss in the group, the first question we asked is in what context? Are we talking about payments? Are we talking about identities? Or end users? And then we thought, who owns the customer is also a very important question, and who is providing the value, because that will determine who will charge and who will pay. And then one school of thought, somebody said in our group that consumers should pay like they buy a physical wallet. So I buy my wallet, and they should be able to buy a digital wallet too. And then to counter that point, we said service providers already charging end users in an indirect way. So they embed this infrastructure costs and providing wallets only to enable them to do transactions. So for example, if a service provider can help or enable or providing this wallet for free to the consumer will end up spending more money at the service provider. So it's just
So there's someone who provides the wallet,
yeah,
and there's someone who provides services that you access using that wallet.
Yes.
And that's the person who is charging the customer.
Yeah, charging also depends, what we said, it depends when you can charge, because it should be, if it's too small, who's providing the service. If if you go to Amazon, for instance, and buy products from there, and they have the attributes from the user, they will not probably charge from the user. They will just let them have their identities, or they create a login, and then they let them do the shopping. But if the user has a personal data store, or if he's using that attributes, he's spending at Amazon and using the same mechanism with other service provider, then it will be like a Google Drive or iCloud, where you start paying as a user, end user. Yeah. So, and then, please correct me if I miss any point.
I think I think the other thing, it's not necessarily that the consumer or the end user would pay. So we talked a little bit about the role, and also, what was the other term that we used? The mandate, roles and mandates. So the role is, we often talk about old business languages, who owns the customer or who owns the consumer, as the consumer is always purchasing, which is a very kind of American perspective of behavior. But if you think of role, then I could be a patient or a student or an employee or a parent or a teacher or a child.
So we talk about the holder in SSI terms. We
exactly.
call him the...
So the role changes, and then the mandate of what that role is trying to do. So yes, maybe I am a consumer and I expect something to be free because I may be paying for it in some other way, or maybe I'm trying to do something to exercise legal rights like power of attorney, and therefore I want to know that I'm paying for that service because I want the governance or the digital proof of everything that I've done. So we think that this idea of consumer or customer is outdated and we need to be thinking in the context of roles and mandates. And then that changes and opens up the business model considerably as well.
So if we summarize, we say that the wallet could be paid by the user when the user is using another service, and they are sort of enhancing the prices for that by making him pay for that wallet in that way. And in other cases, it depends what the user or holder, or in your old-fashioned way, the consumer, someone who acts, the actor, what role they have and what mandate they have. Is that the summary of what you decided? I see here not the data provider, not the data aggregator. They are exploiting personal data.
That's
so
somebody else's notes.
Someone else's notes. And is the person here? I think we have we have an actor here.
In fact, we think in our group, when we looked at that, we think the data providers will pay. There are big incentives for the costs that they can reduce in an ecosystem, and also data I'm not sure about the data aggregator, but the providers or the verifiers or the consumer of the data, not the end consumer, we think there are big models in terms of cost, governance, transparency. So without understanding the context of that, we might have arrived at a slightly different point of view.
And then we haven't discussed the onboarding cost to set it all up and to connect to the ecosystem, to keep it secure, to do the onboarding in a role in the ecosystem, into the ecosystem. I think that's all the providers and the validators and issuers who would pay for that.
That's one of the other points, is that particularly in decentralized world, everyone thinks a wallet, you know, why would you pay for a wallet? And really, why would you? And I say that as somebody who creates a wallet, like it's worth nothing. You could go and get an open source wallet. That's actually not what you're paying for. You're paying for an evergreen capability, the reliability of the API, the infrastructure, the revocation, the audit, the governance.
The compliance,
all of that,
with
and so
legal stuff.
The problem is when you say wallets, yes, you can just go and download an open source wallet this afternoon, but that's actually really, that's really
a top
trivial.
layer, but there's a stack
really
below it that needs to be managed.
Yeah, I'm sure we could discuss this for a long time. We need to go to the other groups as well. Conclusion is this is challenging, and I think we need to revisit existing business models. Okay, so let's move to anonymity.
So this is more or less what we discussed. Our discussion went through a lot of topics. First of all, there was a very good question, what is anonymity? The theme is anonymity, is it a curse or a blessing? What is anonymity? If you see my face but you don't know my name, am I anonymous or not? And so there came a lot of questions and it went very much crisscross the table. Some of the keywords we discussed, is it, for instance, that you can't be found online? Are you anonymous then? No, I don't think so. What would be the role of self-sovereign identity in this? Zero knowledge proof, does it add a lot? And some people said, yes, I think so. And other people say, no, I don't believe in self-sovereign identity. Then we discussed a use case for self-sovereign identity with the help of blockchain, or for blockchain uses, because the B word is often seen as just another database, but there could be use cases when many parties who don't trust each other have to share data that needs to be absolutely available at all times, and the integrity should be secure, but no third party exists in the middle to manage that. In that case, technology can take over. What it can't take over is helping to keep things, the confidentiality. The security is integrity and availability. Confidentiality in a blockchain needs to be catered for because you have to do the permissions and old-fashioned identity management for accessing some blockchain. So identity on behalf of the blockchain or with help of a blockchain are two different things. Somebody said maybe the passport is a very nice example of self-sovereign identity because I carry my passport and, I decide when I show it. I would say what I missed there is that you can't share only one attribute in the passport, or you're sharing the whole passport, but still you keep it with you. Then there are roles in self-sovereign identity when we went into that alley. The issuer who issues your passport, your identity, your driving license, your diplomas, the university, where the real data is oriented in the golden sources. They're not giving it away, but someone who wants to see it just gets to see it, and then the door closes, but the data remains at that place where it was originating in the golden source. And then the holder is the man in the middle who uses it, the holder, the consumer, the patient, the student, whoever. So issuer, validator, and holder, and each has their role, and each has to have access to enter into that role, to be validated that they're worth this role. Now, selective sharing is a term that we heard, only share what's needed and not more than that, and hopefully less even. The PSD2, where payment service providers have to, by law, to enter the back offices of banks to originate a payment there and also get the data of the consumer. If the consumer agrees, of course, strong customer identification. Biometrics and anonymity were discussed. Then the grades of anonymity, you can pay with a small coin or a big coin, and it should be in sync with the risk or the need for that anonymity, as a sort of complement to identity. So then the value of anonymity, and in the end, total anonymity does not exist at all. That was our final and quite negative consensus. Anything to add, maybe? Then.
Yeah, or somebody from the second group. We had a discussion here also on, again, after the break. Anybody want to add something on that? Who took notes?
We chose to remain anonymous, I'm afraid.
Okay, everybody chose to be anonymous. No, but I mean, we touched on, you know, why this was important, and we touched on accountability, the challenge of pseudonymity, who can decide to reveal the true identity. And we said, well, we have a legal system, right? And that works fine, at least in this country and in the Nordics where I come from. But there's easy to see parts of the world where there would not be such a good policy for that.
Okay.
No additional comments? Did that summarize? Right, thank you. Okay, let's go to group 3, where what were the main prohibitors for SSI and, of course, the solutions. And the group claimed to have solved that problem. Yeah.
I was closest, huh? You bastards. Anyway. No, we talked about a lot of topics, actually. Also, I will name a few. The business model, of course. Is there a business model for SSI? And if so, what is it? And trust, the complexity on integration, the user, end user usability. Does he understand what he's doing? Interoperability, adoption, etc. And we sort of talked around those topics, also diverged a bit. Anyway, the first question, although we spent quite some time on it, was the only one I think we all agreed on that was solvable, because we think in a business model for identity, the one profiting the most from whether it's a normal or even a self-sovereign identity, should pay, right? And that is the relying party, the verifier, whatever you want to call it. That is solving a part of their business, that can do business more easily, etc. So it's logical that they will pay. Whether they pay to the issuer of the identity, that remains to be seen, right? It depends a bit on whether it's a government or non-government issuer, whatever. But that is the basic assumption there. When it comes to trust, we also talked about trust quite a bit, and trust in this case or in this context means how do I, as a user or a verifier or whatever, trust a certain solution, and what do we need to trust a certain solution? And will, for instance, a government solution, if the government enters the markets and just issues the wallet and be the operator and takes care of the whole market, will that automatically solve the trust issue? Well, from a Dutch perspective, again, you might say, yeah, why not, for now at least. But then going back to the other table where we had to discuss some, the German occupation or current state Hungary, for instance, yeah, would that be the best solution then if the government is the only issuer? How central or decentral is that? So maybe that's not the best solution. So what we actually discussed quite a bit, and I think more or less agreed, was that maybe for trust, the best way to go forward is to have a public-private cooperation, where you join the forces, maybe in a foundation or something, but where you are also taking care of, are we all sticking to the right roles in the ecosystem?
So actually I would call that a trias politica, where you have rules that you jointly establish, someone to control the adherence to the rules, and then the operations, three
exactly.
different separate parties.
Separate, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think we agreed that that was maybe the best way go forward. So we would not depend on one central whatever. And that is also a way to organize trust. But because if you have this foundation and if they certify new applicants or whatever, you could also label that, right? And you could also explain that to an end user that if it is compliant with these rules, then you see this mark or whatever. And then you can trust that solution.
So you get interesting legal types of entities who consist of a coalition of parties. That's why we see many blockchain coalitions, because they have to do it jointly with all these validators and issuers.
Yes.
And what type of legal establishment would you use for that? And I think that could be a next level challenge.
Yeah, could be. We didn't discuss that one, unfortunately.
You didn't solve that one.
No, not yet. Yeah, but give us half an hour then.
Maybe you should move to table 4.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Yeah, what are the incentives for the attribute owners to actually provide these verifiable credentials? And anybody from this group present here? Yes? You may be anonymous if you like.
Okay. Yeah, I am. No, I already chose to reveal my attributes, so so yeah, we drifted off a bit, but I think there are multiple interesting points. First of all, we came to the conclusion that it might be a bit dependent on who is actually the data source. So if this is a private organization, then they might actually would like to receive some compensation in the form of money, for example. So that might be an incentive, and that would mean that, for example, the data user pays. On the other hand, for governments, there might be something for public value. But then the question is still, how do we convince policymakers? And we didn't came to the answer yet. And if I already had the answer, I think a lot of us wouldn't be here today. Well, they would, but they would have different issues, right, Gregor, for example. And I think also the people from SIDN face the same challenge. And I think the last remark is from my colleague who wasn't in the discussion. I don't know if he's still here. No, he isn't. But this is basically the same point that was on over there, basically. So, and then the thinking of the data source should pay, with the reasoning that they have to comply with GDPR, and in particular with the data portability right. And already in France there is a personal data wallet who is basically doing this. So what they're doing is, as a data source, you can connect to the wallet. And if an end user uses the wallet and says, well, I want to have my data from this data source, then he sends a request. And if you're connected as a data source, then he automatically gets his data. And otherwise, they will send a standard letter to this organization if the data source is not connected. And then they will have to go through the whole hassle of getting all your data and sending it back.
So actually they're using one of the rights in the GDPR, the right to data portability, to leverage the issuance of attributes, which is at the cost of the issuer.
Yeah, that would be
that's
this suggestion.
And making the user happen, make it happen.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So that's a really interesting way of thinking. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if there's anything someone from my group wants to add to this. No? Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
So the question was, there are a lot of these initiatives globally. Let's now finally make a good data layer to the internet. Gaia X is looking at stuff. There's the GAIN initiative, 150 identity specialists. There is the My Data, you know, these type of organizations. The question was, will this work? Now, no one was at that table, so we don't have any solutions, but we have someone who can explain in 3 lines what Gaia X is doing.
In 3 lines even. Let's see if I can do that.
Well,
yeah, maybe a few more,
6.
but yeah. So Gaia X is basically, its initiative started like 1.5 years ago by France and Germany, looking into basically how can we do sovereign data exchange between companies. And not only data exchange, but also discovery of data sets. And so doing that in a distributed way. So the idea around Gaia X is that you can create a data space, and within a data space, you can exchange data with each other in a trusted way. The challenge here with this project is especially around the sovereign decentralized piece. How are you going to do this? How are you going to discover a service in a decentralized way? So for the past 1.5 years around Gaia X, we've been looking into which standards that are out there can be used to support this type of system. From an identity perspective, things like verifiable credentials, but also SID, which is looking after identities in anchoring transactions of identity-related stuff on a blockchain and making it decentralized that way, to seeing if that could be a solution to Gaia X. On if Gaia X is going to be something, if it's going to be a success, that is something time should prove. We're now 1.5 years in, and we're still having discussion around which standards, how to interpret them. Do we maybe need to get a new standard? Do we need to extend on a standard? But what I do think with such a project does give is more insights on what's available, and inspiring companies as well to look at this and see how a decentralized type of setup or a sovereign type of setup can help them solve their data exchange issues. So even if Gaia X is not going to be the success as we're hoping it's going to be, it's definitely going to accelerate other projects that are looking at Gaia X. And I can tell you there are a lot of projects looking at Gaia X as it is such a big thing, like building one data exchange, standard data exchange framework for Europe, and gathering information out of it. So that's basically where we're at with Gaia X.
Yeah, so we see a trend next to Gaia X that are more like these type of initiatives. So maybe it's a good topic for a next IDnext conference.
Definitely.
But I think today it was a bit too immature. We are too immature.
I can tell you, it took me, I think, a month after I looked into Gaia X. It took me literally a month to basically understand the concept, as it is so high over, and now it's a little bit more, there are a little bit more details to it.
I think that cooperation, as I see in this whole conference, more and more talks are not going about talking about how one company solved their access management terrible spaghetti, but no, it's about how more about cooperation, solving it globally, cross-country, cross-national borders. You know, so I think the trend is pro.
Definitely, yeah. And if we at some point can all agree on how to do it, that's going to be the success there, right?
Coalition of the willing.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for volunteering.
Okay, the answer is here. The answer is very short. Did COVID improve ID? And the answer is not really. Anybody was part of this table want to summarize? Oh, okay, I can just read the points here. Not really, but some patterns. Raised awareness on use cases. Need for digital payments and wallets. More digital working and virtual. Digital identity tracking, yes. Personal and national attributes.
Differences obvious. Yeah.
Yeah.
Regional and national differences are obvious. EU collaboration could have been better. That's one of the things. And there was another one. It accelerated the use case. That's more or less the same. People were forced to work more digitally due to COVID. So COVID app or digital tickets. Identities are used more to track. It showed the differences between the different use cases, and that's about more or less the same. So do we all agree? Did it improve identity, COVID? I think it raised the awareness a lot.
It made a lot of difference for our sector, for research and education.
Yeah.
Previously...
Microphone.
Previously, the core access mechanism was IP address. And that sort of went out of the door at the point of COVID, because everybody was working from home. So you had to have some other mechanism for establishing identity and access. And so identity, federated identity in our case, became really rapidly rose to become the primary source of identity, which I think, generally speaking, was a benefit. But yeah, I don't know how that went in other sectors.
All right, thank you.
Well, last table, the role of the state.
Now you get the mic.
Now you get the mic.
Okay, now I get the mic. I'll wait for everyone to join. Yeah. So role of the state is obviously, well, you're at risk of having a lengthy discussion depending on where you are in the political spectrum, I guess. Either less role for the state or more role for the state. But with respect to digital identity, I think we all agreed that there is at least a role to play for the state. First of all, what we mentioned is, well, there should be at least some legal framework, some recourse when there is digital identity and there are digital identity providers, that it is clear for you in case there is something happening with your digital identity or it's breached, that there is a framework that helps you in raising that issue and helps you resolve that issue. Right now, I'm not sure if something happens to, for example, your Apple wallet, although it may contain not necessarily all the relevant information, but if it's breached, I don't know which like legal grounds you have to make appeal, and where do you do that? So there's a role there to play for government to make it a better and clear legal framework. Then also we still see a role for government as the origin of identity. I think we all are born into this world and registered at a government, which holds from that moment on basically your identity data. And during the course of your life, it keeps adding data to it as well. In the Netherlands, you get your driving license, and the only information, let's say, department that has that information is a part of the Dutch government. So they possess, well, not only your core identity data, but also a rich set of data on each individual. And they could be a bit more active in allowing others to tap into that information. So take a role of an identity provider as well in a interoperable and easy to use way. So you don't have to request something at the Dutch DMV, wait for 5 weeks and you get a PDF. That doesn't work. So there's a legal framework, there is the more active role as a data sharer, let's say, data provider. There's also still the role of regulator, so basically gatekeeper of the system. If we open up the market for all kinds of private companies, may have all kinds of different technical standards or ethical standards on their business. I don't think we want that as a market, as a consumer either. So there's also a role for them to maybe set some baselines, set some technical standards or ethical standards for companies to adhere to when providing these digital identity services. And then I think a fourth one, I'm actually going not necessarily from top to bottom, just going all over the place. Fourth one was mentioned in a number of presentations. Companies, mostly with commercially driven, will focus on getting the mass, will focus on getting the 80%. They might not be that interested in getting the final 20% that isn't necessarily digital savvy or digital capable or even identified at all. So there's a role to play for government to bridge the gap basically to 100%.
The digital divide between the people who have a digital identity and who don't have a digital identity.
The digital divide and also even the identity gap. Right? It was discussed the people who actually don't have an identity.
People.
Yeah, the stateless people. Yeah. Or the people who we know are from the UK but just don't possess a passport, what was referenced earlier. So there's a role for them to play there. What we also said is we tried to take the opposite view of, okay, no state. Can we do without a state, actually? Well, we found that a little bit difficult just because they are inherently from the moment you were born, they possess your identity data. And they are, at least in the Western world, a very reliable source of a provider of your identity data. So we need those that state basically always as a reference point for the initial identification. If I was an identity service provider, I would still want to see that passport or tap into a government database to confirm that, yeah, I'm indeed Nick. And then there is the regulation part. So we still see that without a state actor, let's say, that kind of regulates the market, might become a bit Wild West. So there is still a role to play for government, but to summarize, we feel it's more of a infrastructural kind of a role. So they provide the basics for other companies to build the trains, provide the trains, keep the trains running. Because ultimately, that's what probably those companies are better capable of than our government.
So specialists could do the content and the operations, and the state should be a regulator, provider of basics, and sort of monitoring the adherence and the rules of play.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Then I see that something about fraud and prosecution, maybe, and multiple identities.
Yeah. So we said if there is no state, so. If there's no state, I don't have a passport that's issued by the Dutch government. I can go to any company and say, well, my name is Donald Duck.
Yeah, you could be anyone.
Well, I'm Donald Duck, and tomorrow I'm going to a different company and I'm
Mickey
Mickey
get
Mouse.
in a cowboy type of zone.
Yeah, exactly. There's no reference, let's say.
All right, anyone anything to add? Because at 5 o'clock we'll have the award ceremony. I don't know how much time we still have, but I suggest we go and have a drink.
I just want to thank everybody for being part of this, doing the discussion. I think it's very valuable to have these discussions and summarizing. So I think we all learned something from this. So thank you, everybody.